Hello and welcome. We're delighted to welcome you to the second session of our two-part exhibition spotlight program, Anne Frank and All of Us. The Pentacrest museums serve to advance the educational, research, and engagement missions of the university, enhancing campus-wide focus on cultural and environmental diversity. Let Me Be Myself, the life story of Anne Frank exhibit, and these webinars have been a perfect fit for our museums. Now traveling the state of Iowa, this exhibit inspires continued conversations about the significance of Anne Frank's life, as with all of society today. It's an honor to highlight the many connections created out of the international collaboration to educate on Anne Frank's legacy. Today, we explore the history of diary writing and gain insight into the literary and creative journeys of notable contemporary authors and illustrators today who have been inspired by Anne Frank's story, leading them to produce inspiring works of their own. As the Old Capitol Museum serves to host this exhibit, and we commemorate the 175th anniversary of the University of Iowa, we want to acknowledge the native lands we stand on as the homelands of the following tribes, and the many tribes and indigenous nations that continue to thrive in the state of Iowa. As an academic institution, it is our responsibility to acknowledge the sovereignty and traditional territories of these tribal nations and the history of dispossession that have allowed for the growth of this institution since 1847. Consistent with the university's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, understanding the historical and current experiences of Native peoples will help inform the work we do collectively as a university to engage in building relationships through academic scholarship, collaborative partnerships, community service, enrollment, and retention efforts, acknowledging our past, present, and future Native nations. To learn more, you can visit the following sites that we are going to put in the chat. The exhibition spotlight series, along with the Provost Global Forum events this month, has been made possible through the hard work and collaboration of faculty, staff, and students of international programs, Division of World Languages, the Provost Global Forum, with the support from the staff of the Pentacrest Museums. I would be remiss if I didn't extend our gratitude to the Office of the Vice President of Research, whose support makes all the museums' work and exhibits possible. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce our presenters today. Dr. Waltraud Maierhofer is a professor of German and has recently joined the faculty in Global Health Studies program at the University of Iowa. She loves to get students excited about other cultures, learn what we have in common, what differentiates us, exploring human nature through narratives of diverse lives. Her research and teaching interests are based in German literature and culture from the 18th century to the present. She is especially interested in representations of health and human rights issues. She has edited several historical documents and works of fiction in English translation, including The Child's Witches of Lucerne and Bacau, forthcoming Lay University Press. Professor Meyerhoffer has been at the University of Iowa since 1990 and was the principal lead for the Provost Global Forum this year. Welcome, Waltraud. Joining us today, all the way from Israel, is David Polonsky. He is an internationally recognized illustrator, born in 1973, Kiev, USSR, immigrating to Israel in 1981. Polonsky is a graduate of the Bezalel Academy of Art and Design in Jerusalem in 1998. Polonsky's work ranges from illustrations for top-tier newspapers, magazines, and children's books to stage and cinema design. His projects include the design of the acclaimed animated documentary Waltz with Bashir in 2008, and an adaptation of Anne Frank's Diary of a Young Girl to a graphic novel that has been translated to more than 25 languages since its publication in 2017. Winner of numerous awards, including 2 Israeli Film Academy Awards and an Anderson Award for Children's Books Illustration, he currently teaches at the Bezalel Academy of Art and at Shenkar School of Design. Good evening and welcome, David. Nancy Churnin. Thank you, David. Nancy Churnin, our children's book author, is the author of Martin and The Kindred Spirits of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Anne Frank, that is being featured today. Churnin is a National Jewish Book Award winner and author of 10 picture books about people who have persevered to achieve their dreams and make a world a better place. Martin and Anne is on the list of the Louisiana Young Readers' Choice Award, on the New York City Civics for All list and notable book for Global Society. Additional awards for her books include the Junior Library Guild Starred Reviews, National Council for Social Studies Notables, multiple Silver Eureka Awards, multiple inclusions on a Mighty Girl list, Sidney Taylor Notable, Towner Award nominee, Sakura Medal finalist, notable book for a Global Society, Anne Izzard Storyteller's Choice Award, and the South Asia Book Award. A lot of her books are translated in many languages, including Braille. A native of New Yorker, Nancy lives in North Texas with her family, which includes a dog named Dog and 2 cantankerous cats. Welcome, Nancy. Please join me to give a warm welcome to Waltraud, David, and Nancy. And now I pass on the mic to Waltraud, who will give us an introduction.
Thank you so much, Carolina, for having me on this panel. It's a real pleasure and honor. As we remember Anne Frank's diary, let's also be mindful that in all countries in the world today, there are children living in exceptionally difficult conditions. And let's think about what we as individuals can do to help. But my main purpose here today is to provide a little background on how Anne Frank's diary fits into the history of journal keeping, published diaries, and diaries in fiction. My first section is on the path of Anne Frank's diary to publication. How Anne Frank's diary became one of the most important and most inspiring books in the world. Already during her time in hiding, Anne heard on the radio about a plan by Dutch publishers to collect wartime diaries and print them. She imagined reworking her diary into a novel and becoming a published author. On March 29, 1944, she wrote, "Imagine how interesting it would be if I published a novel about the secret annex." She rewrote her diary from the red jacket bound book on loose sheets. Anne's father, Otto Frank, received the diary documents from their family's helper, Miek Gies, after he returned to Amsterdam, and they learned that Anne and her sister Margot had died in Bergen-Belsen. Only after Otto Frank had begun to cope with her death was he able to read it. He wrote to his sister in September of 1945. What I read in her book is so indescribably captivating that I just have to keep reading. He was so taken by the diary that he shared excerpts with relatives and friends, some of them in Switzerland. So he started working on a translation into German. More and more friends told Otto Frank that the diary was an important human document and that it should be available for many to read. It took, however, some convincing for Otto Frank to go along and look for a publisher. But then he dedicated the rest of his life to Anne Frank's legacy and its message. 2 of his acquaintances were historians, Jan and Annie Romein. Jan Romein first wrote a column titled A Child's Voice about the diary in the Dutch newspaper Het Parool, a moving piece in which Romein included how captivated he himself was by it. The column appeared in the paper's front page in April of 1946. It attracted the attention of the publishing house Contact. Otto Frank then decided to make changes to the manuscript from the material that Anne Frank had edited, and he included passages that Anne had left out, and he deleted others. The book appeared in 1947 with the title Hecht Achterhuis, literally meaning the house in the back, generally translated as the secret annex. It was the title Anne Frank had given her novel. How proud she would have been. The book received positive reviews and was recommended especially for parents and educators. Soon there was demand for a second and third edition, and since then, interest has not stopped. In 1950, the first translations appeared in other countries. First the French one, then the German, and this is the title page. In 1952, 2 English versions followed. According to Otto Frank, the book made a deep impression on readers everywhere. Today, the diary is available in over 70 languages, one of the most translated books in the world. I hear that for the City of Literature Festival in fall, here in Iowa City, a reading in many languages is scheduled at the University of Iowa. Let me say a few more words about the reception in Germany. The German translation was first published in West Germany in 1950, that is within the first year after the founding of the 2 German states. The text on the cover reads, "The book has not much to do with politics, but much with the people of our days. It is not about the coincidental fate of just one family. It is a lasting document, representative of all humanity, and it is the bittersweet present by a child." End of quote. This first edition in German was not particularly successful, but a cheap pocketbook edition followed a few years later in 1955 and sold very well. In the meantime, the diary had become a bestseller in the US and was turned into a popular Broadway play written by Francis Goodrich and Albert Hackett. It won a number of awards. Then a Hollywood film followed, directed by George Stevens in 1959, and it made the diary even more known. In Germany alone, 2 million people saw the play, and the diary became a bestseller. Another edition in East Germany, the German Democratic Republic, followed in 1957. Anne Frank's diary has been translated into more than 70 languages and adapted into several novels, plays, and feature films. In its wake, other diaries by survivors of the Holocaust, including ones written as teenagers, were published and have become widely read. I believe Carolina will show a sampling of these at the end of our presentation. My next section reflects about who writes diaries and why. It is a familiar story. Anne received her diary for the 13th birthday. At this point, nobody knew that they would soon be hiding and that she would no longer have adventures and conversations with her friends she could reflect upon in writing, as she imagined in her first entry. After 2 months in the secret annex, she began to invent several fictional characters whom she would address in her diary, especially Kitty, and you see her handwriting here. For the teenager, writing to her imaginary friends became an important routine with which she was able to cope with an extremely limited life and limited number of human contacts. The custom of keeping personal records with entries arranged by date is very old, and we have records from Greek and Roman antiquity and from Egypt. The diary form often overlaps with other forms of record keeping, such as business records or an artist's or writer's sketchbook. Some researchers distinguish personal diaries, which include individual experiences, thoughts, or feelings, from other forms of writing, which include comments on public events at the time, events outside of the immediate experience. However, it has been the latter, the intersection of the personal and public history, which has long piqued the interest of readers and led to published diaries. People are curious how famous persons experience and reflect about historical events and persons. With the growing interest in so-called history from below, that is record of how ordinary people lived and thought in times of upheaval and crisis, such as times of war, revolutions, etc., there has been a growing market for diaries that until then lay forgotten in archives. Today, social media and blogs have developed into a form of public, mostly visual diary that is shared with one's friends and that can vary from just a few to limitless. For some young people who grew up with social media, the concept of writing for oneself may no longer be familiar. Such writing as therapy is often recommended, though, in figuring out and dealing with difficult situations. And I'd love to hear in the Q&A about whether members in our audience write diary and for what purpose, and if they ever go back to reading them. Next, I will show a few examples from the history of published diaries and their intersection with fictional writing. Can we go back one slide? I begin with Jewish culture. One more back. Yeah, one of the oldest diaries from Jewish culture that is available in print today is titled Magid Mesharim, or Preacher of Righteousness. The writer was Rabbi Yosef van Ephraim Caro, a scholar of Jewish law born in Toledo, Spain in 1488 Common Era. For 50 years, he filled a diary with details of an angel who visited him routinely at night and lectured him on correct behavior, from modesty, asceticism, and patience to correct prayer and his reputation in heaven. Next one. To my knowledge, the first known Hebrew diary by a woman is that of Hava Shapiro. She belonged to a family that introduced Hebrew writing to the Ukraine on our minds today for very different reasons. She was the first female Hebrew literary critic and one of the first women to write Hebrew essays. Her remarkable handwritten diary, which she kept from 1900 to 1941, was only published in 2008. She called her diary "My Own Special Corner," Sacred Beloved. Next, I'd like to show you a fascinating example from 18th century culture, originally in German. The 18th century was a time when an educated middle class became important socially and economically. It cultivated sensibility over rationalism and emphasized self-reflection, exploring and expressing one's feelings and thoughts, and forming an understanding of oneself as an individual. Doing so by writing diaries and letters was highly encouraged, and even fiction and written in these forms allowed immediacy and sharing of feelings. The novel The Sorrows of Young Werther, where you see a title image here, by writer and statesman Johann Wolfgang Goethe, was a literary sensation throughout Europe and caused a wave of copycat suicides. It is written in the form of letters and diary entries by its sensitive protagonists named Werther. Werther gains insight into his past by reading his own diary. He states, for example, "My diary, which I have for some time neglected, came before me today, and I am amazed to see how deliberately I have entangled myself step by step, to have seen my position so clearly, and yet to have acted so like a child. Even still, I behold the result plainly, and yet have no thought of acting with greater prudence." He does not use writing as a therapeutic approach to dealing with his overwhelming feelings of unrequited love and lack of place in society. The next example is also from the 18th century, you see a page diary by Mozart's sister Marie Anne called Nannerl. The diary consists of short factual entries, such as when she attended mass or who visited family. Today's literary imagination is not content with such a diary. So, for example, the writer Alison Bolt wrote a novel about the sister of the famous composer and childhood prodigy, a novel which he then supplemented with a fictional diary online that promoted her novel. And you see part of the web page entry here for the diaries. A few more words on the writer Goethe, on whom I have written a lot and taught many classes. He kept diaries throughout his adult life, some of them already with the intent of publication. His diary and letters while traveling in Italy for 2 years in the 1780s formed the basis for 3 volumes of his autobiography, which he published 3 decades later, titled Italian Journey. And you see here a title page with his portrait and a review in the New York Times from 1986 on the bicentenary of his travels. In Italy, Goethe experienced what he called a rebirth. He stylized his studies in Italy as the beginning and program of German classicism. In the 19th century, the interest in the daily notes of public figures was firmly established. Readers wanted to know not only about their personal life, but how they became who they were and how they perceived big events. Here's a very different example, though. It's a recent find. Adam Plummer was not a public figure. Beginning in 1841, Adam Plummer kept a simple diary and kept doing so for 60 years. In a small leather-bound book, the Maryland resident noted major life events, such as his marriage to Emily Plummer and the births of their 9 children. He also recorded his payments and receipts. But Adam Plummer was a slave, and so he also wrote about events that to a modern reader seem far less mundane. Again and again in his diary, he struggled to detail how his family had been torn apart and how he sought to reunite them. The diary is now in the Smithsonian Institution, and for a while one could read it on its webpage, but it has disappeared, probably because it is being published and copyrighted. In the history of diaries, there's a mix of writing in the diary form that is intended for publication versus public personal writing that was not intended to be seen by others. Since the 19th century, the publication of diaries by the authors has become commonplace, notably among politicians seeking justification, but also amongst artists and writers. An extraordinary read is by the South African leader Nelson Mandela. He included his journals in his book, Conversations with Myself, published in 2010. You are seeing the handwritten page with Mandela's last diary entry while he was in prison in 1990. Because the remainder of the program is devoted to visual retellings of Anne Frank's diary, I'd like to mention 2 diaries by artists, namely the Swiss Paul Klee and the Mexican Frida Kahlo. Paul Klee was called an artist of visual language. His personal notebooks are as beautiful as any of his finished works. The Zentrum Paul Klee digitized almost 3,900 pages of the personal notebooks, which are mostly sources for his lectures. From the last 10 years of Mexican painter Frida Kahlo, a diary is extant which chronicles her life and thoughts and her pains, and it contains drawings that have been called wild. Many of them are motifs she then elaborated on in painting. It was locked away after her death in 1954 and only published 40 years later. The journal is as captivating to look at as it is to read. I have a few more personal favorites, and I can just go show those briefly and then maybe explain more in the questions part. There is, of course, Daniel Defoe's Journal of the Plague Year, then the Diary of Lewis and Clark. Anna Boswell is a personal favorite of mine because she was something like a cultural agent for German culture in English-speaking countries. The Diaries of Franz Kafka are fascinating, and I think that's my short list. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you so much, Waltraud. Very fascinating, and what depth of knowledge and history. I had no idea it went back that far, and how broad it was. I'd like to now allow David Polonsky. Now we're moving up to the 21st century with David Polonsky's work, a graphic novel adaptation of Anne Frank's diary.
Thank you, Carolina. And thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Already learned a lot of stuff. So just let me share my screen here, and I'll tell you a little bit about the making of this graphic novel adaptation. So it's a commissioned work it was commissioned by the Anne Frank Funds in Basel, which was founded by her father. It's a non-profit, and they actually contacted Ari Fullman, who's a film director. We've been working together on many projects for years now. And one day he called me up and he said that there's this suggestion, this offer to do an adaptation of Anne Frank's diary. And both of us, our first reaction was absolutely no. And is to decline, because first of all, there's a feeling that everything has been said and done about this. And the other reservations that we had concerned the fact that she's almost a pop icon, and her image has been used in many different ways that sometimes have a little relation to her story and to the book itself. There's this kind of almost an industry around her image, and we were a little bit reluctant in the beginning to take part in it. But then we realized that somebody's going to do it, and then we felt this kind of responsibility, at least to reread it again as adults. And what both of us discovered was so far from this iconic image and its use in popular culture, that we felt compelled to bring to the front our reading of this text, and most importantly, the complexity and what of her writing, her humor, and the fact that she was a complicated little teenager, highly gifted writer, a keen observer, and all of these things are very personal and very very humanistic values that she believed in, and we wanted to bring that to the front, and knowing that that there is a chance to do it the way that we feel is right, we decided to accept the challenge. So the first thing, the complicated part of this is the fact that the text is not only, it's not just a story, it's a document. In some respect, it's an almost sacred text, and we have an obligation to serve, to be right by the people who are depicted in the book, and to Annie herself on the one hand. On the other hand, we need some creative freedom, because if we want to emphasize her artistic inclinations, again, her sense of humor, we had to make an adaptation, and not necessarily a homage and not necessarily a document. So this is a good way to explain the way we approached it. It's those were the photographs were of Anne's family, and this is my take, which is to say it's kind of a loving caricature, and we put the humor and the warmness of these people in the front. It's not a tragedy. It's a piece about life, and this is a little bit of something that I did. This is kind of a technical aid. One of the first things that I did to acquaint myself with their likeness was to make a little sculpture. This way, I know what she looks like from every angle. And this is it becoming more and more personal. These are the people who are responsible for saving Anne's family's life for more than 2 years in the annex. And here they are, how they appear in the book. Another part that has to do of the work that has to do with the documentation is the research, visual research, and there are a lot of photos of the place. They hid in an annex of Otto's, Anne's father's little firm that manufactured and distributed congealing agent for jams and stuff like that. And these are the workers, and these are the people who, the courageous people that kept them alive for 2 years. And on the left is a photograph of the kitchen, I think right after the war. And on the right is a reconstruction made by the Anne Frank House Museum in Amsterdam for a book. If you go to visit the museum today, you won't find these furnitures, but it gives you an idea about what it looked like. And this is Anne's room and her parents' room. And this is the representation, this taking care of the factual parts of the texts and giving a more concrete idea about the place. And in a way, it's like a theater piece that went on for a very long time, because the setting is the same all the time, but Anne creates a lot of, she lives life to the fullest, even in these very confining and depressing settings. And this is a little bit about the process of the work. So the greatest challenge on Ari's part was to edit the text and to decide what will work and what won't in comics. If we had to translate, to adapt all the text into a graphic novel, that would be a 3,000-page book that nobody would want to read. So what Ari did, he would reread every time 10 pages of the book and come up with ideas of what's the most important things to show here, what are the motifs. And this is a page drawn and written by Ari, and this is his part of the work, and mine, and then I have to turn this into this and that are the same page. So he's kind of like the director, and I'm responsible for characters, like the whole, if it were a film, the whole crew besides the director. On the left side, you can see this kind of the result of Ari's approach to the text, which was the condensing and bringing to the front topics and motifs that he found important. So throughout the book, Anne repeatedly complains about the way she's always compared to her perfect older sister. She's like, she's the good girl, and Anne is neurotic, and she complains, and she makes fun of people, and she's nervous, and she's anxious, and she is opinionated, and these complaints return every other page in the book, basically. So there isn't one page where all of these comparisons, all of these entries are together. But what Ari did, it took this kind of motif, and we decided to present it in a single page. It's always about me and my sister. On the right, you can see another thing that the annex lends itself to this kind of comics storytelling. Is the building is it's kind of the cross section of the building itself is like a page of comics. And as I said, Anne is living inside her head, and inside her diary, and in her writing and reading. But what the graphic novel format allows us is to make these leaps from reality to what she's talking about, and we can escape together with her into her fantasies, into her imagination, and be together with her in her anxieties. So one moment we're at the kitchen, the next moment we're at the royal wedding, and then there's a nightmare, and then there are adolescent fantasies about her mother's death, and it's all on the same page. Other thing that kind of used for our advantage is the fact that it was a cultured family, and art and literature, especially literature, played a role in their life. So I'm using other pop icons from European art as a part of their vocabulary. Of course, I'm imposing it on them, but I think I managed to capture a little bit both of the culture that she's living in on the one hand, and to express her feelings that she's writing. So we have on the two sides, of course, what is expected of her and how she feels on the inside. And these are, of course, on the right is Gustav Klimt, and on the left is the famous Munch painting. One of the reoccurring or the most pressing issues in the diary is, of course, food, and she approaches it in different ways in prose, but it's a consistent consideration, and we found ourselves going further and further with visual metaphors to catch up with her. And of course, there's in comics we have this kind of synesthetic power. We can mix senses, and this is an attempt to describe what it feels like, to describe Anne's description of what it feels like to be in a state of constant alarms, bombing alarms, and this is very spooky to be showing this double spread today, when we know for a fact that there are a lot of children experiencing this in this same moment. It's nighttime in Kiev now, and it's going on at this moment. Another consideration that we had in making this book was guided by this decision to emphasize the complexity behind the icon, to show that she was a living girl, and we decided to include parts that were not included in the first editions of the book because her father censored them, things that relate to puberty. She describes her first period, and she has different sexual thoughts. And her father, as a man who was born in the 19th century, of course, couldn't stomach that. But sensibilities have changed, and we felt that it was very important to include these parts. Of course, they were also published in later editions, but for us, even though it was deliberately, it was aimed at young audiences, we made a point out of including these kind of parts that could be difficult for conservative audiences, because we want to show her as a round living figure on the one hand. On the other hand, we wouldn't, she says that I must admit, every time I see a female nude, I go into ecstasy. If only I had a girlfriend. So we do want to address it, but we don't want to be too explicit. So again, her erudition comes to our help, because she was really into Greek culture and art. So this is the solution. And this is, for me personally, the most moving part of the work, because the work took about 2.5 years, and you get into this kind of a routine, and you solve creative problems, and you get kind of sucked into the work, and you tend to forget what you're talking about. But then towards the end of the diary, we come to this passage where she's and I think Waltraud mentioned that she's talking about what will be, and she's hoping to use all the materials, all the troubles and the suffering as material for writing in the future. And in here, I had this chance to give her this. It's such a cruel irony that she doesn't know. And as a parent, also, you think about the future of your child, and you can really appreciate the loss when you consider the potential. And hers was amazing. So this is how I imagined her, like in her 40s, late 30s, as an editor, really cool lady. And I come here to the last spread, the last page of the diary, and it presented a very complicated illustration problem, because I know that this is the end, and she doesn't. The diary stops; it doesn't end. But we have to acknowledge that in our book, because we're depicting, because we know what happened. And this last illustration could not have been made in any other time except the end of the work on the book, because it's a compilation of the different ants throughout the book. And actually, the last entry in the diary is this kind of teenage angst, self-doubt. Why am I this way? Why I'm that way? Who am I? Why am all these different people? And so this is what we were showing, and it ties up. I think it represents this intention that we had going on into this project of showing complexity as an important part of life, of humor as a way of coping and looking at the world. And I hope that we managed a little bit to undermine this monolithic, iconic figure and make her a little bit more accessible, more human. And I think it goes along very well with her values. And just to finish up, it's I've made, I think, 16 or so children's books, and I never think of that of my work as being education. It's like it's a way for me to express myself, and if children happen to read these books, that's very nice. But in this case, and I think for me, it was the first time where I felt this responsibility to educate, but the message is, again, it's not this one thing. There is no way to implement her thoughts, her figure, her destiny, or on any political or ideological agenda. I think the only agenda that I feel that is important in this case is her own, and that's humanity, the belief in the goodness of people, and the power of observation and humor. And I'll stop here, I think.
Wow, thank you, David. That's incredible. I want to be mindful of the time, and I'm so grateful for the very rich portrait of your journey. And I would like to turn it over to Nancy. What we're going to do, Nancy, I'm going to give you the rest of the time, and we're actually going to do a pretty short Q&A, but submit your questions and we will try to answer them online. And all the speakers here are willing to stay a few minutes extra for people, but if people have to leave, submit your questions, we'll try. So Nancy, go right ahead. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen back, and we're going to start back with you.
Thank you, Carolina, and thank you so much to Dr. Maierhoffer and David. Wonderful presentations. I'm so excited to share about Martin and Anne and why I wrote that and what the diary has meant to me and what I'm hoping that kids will take away from it, of all ages. We can move through quickly. When I was growing up, I kept a notebook by my side. I would jot down journal entries, stories, poems. And when I discovered Anne Frank's diary, the power of it for me was that she was a girl just like me, but she lived in extraordinary times. So that's me growing up in the Bronx, New York. And again, she's ordinary, but extraordinary at the same time. Because the things that she's talking about, the issues with her parents, the jealousy. I have an older sister too, is so perfect. My sister is so perfect. She even supplied the shirt for me to wear today. And because everything my older sister does is perfect. And I just know how that feels. But of course, she lived in extraordinary times. But the ordinariness of that diary, it gave us something to identify with. Why did I write this book, Martin and Anne? In 2017, when I started this book, there was the hate crimes were on the rise. Now, hate crimes have always been with us, yes? But it seemed to me it was just flooding the news. It was so upsetting. I have actual figures in this, and I won't go through everything in here because I know our time is short. But it's just so many groups were targeted because of gender identity, because of race, because of religion. There's never a good reason for hate. And I was looking for people who didn't lose hope in discouraging times, because I didn't want to lose hope. So I was looking for, as David was saying, he writes for himself. I needed the light. I needed people who didn't lose hope. I found it in Dr. King. I found it in Anne Frank. The fact that these two shared hope in such bleak times gave me hope. I wanted to share that hope. I also wanted to share that these two people who were born the same year, 1929, they never lost hope. Now, very often we think of Dr. King as an adult and Anne Frank as a teen, but they were born in the same year, 1929. They're just fixed in our minds at different ages because Dr. King became famous as an adult. Anne became famous years after her death for the diary she'd written as a teen. I often, when I share this book with kids, we look at them and we say, look at how different they are. We talk about all the ways in which they're different. And by the end of the book, we talk about the ways in which they're similar. And let's just keep going. So again, they were born in the same year. You know what? There were a lot of parallels in their families. They were both born to loving families. They both had an older sibling, the older sisters. And what else was happening in 1929? A stock market crash, the Great Depression. How did that affect their lives? And what is happening in our world today that makes people afraid and angry, that makes them listen to leaders that tell them to attack certain groups? This year marks their 93rd birthdays. Dr. King would have been 93 on January 15th, Anne Frank 93 on June 12th. What have they taught us? How can we help their love live on? And we can just keep going, but I want to say too that that the power of a diary. Dr. Meyerhoffer offered this quote, represented that Anne's diary is representative of all humanity. David talked about, making her real to us. That's what a diary does. There's a certain playbook that we find that autocrats create. First, they segregate. Then once people are segregated, then there's a petri dish for dehumanization. Because if you don't see people in real life, it's very easy to dehumanize them. And once they're dehumanized, that can lead to genocide. I just made a trip recently to the Dallas Holocaust Museum, and I got to see all these caricatures of Jewish people. And Jewish people weren't the only people Hitler discriminated against. But you see how these caricatures can allow people to get these wrong ideas of who people are. A diary is like the antidote for that, because it allows us to identify and see people. Anne Frank is just like you and me. When we listen to Dr. King's words, we know his desires, his hopes and dreams are just like ours. And these are what wonderful museums like the Pentacrest Museum does for us. This exhibit does for us. What the Anne Frank House does, raises awareness of the dangers of anti-Semitism, racism, discrimination. Again, all these wonderful museums, the National Civil Rights Museum, and we have Dory Lerner, the education director here, I think, on this, listening here, and who has done such wonderful work. And it's always about the ongoing struggle for human rights. Carolina, you, Dory Lerner, Patricia Sarles, who was also, I believe, here, is sharing with us the universality, the importance of relating Anne Frank diary to all stories, to humanizing us all. We all have the same hopes and dreams. I was so honored when the Book Wrangler recommended Martin and Anne to educators. This is how he linked the two, the Anne Frank books, the Dr. King books, the Hamilton cast, Hamilton Broadway, the Gilda Lehrman Institute of American History saw this to show the connections, how we need to humanize groups that are marginalized. And if we can keep going, because I'm going to move quickly, I know we have very little time. Here are books that when I share the book with adults, I talk about Hitler's American model. I learned through this book by James Q. Whitman that Hitler sent lawyers to the US to study and adapt Jim Crow laws to create the Nuremberg laws. That's why Dr. King wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." That's what I'm hoping Martin and Anne will remind us of. Isabel Wilkerson's brilliant book, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents, how people create caste systems to marginalize, to dehumanize, and that becomes the petri dish in which attacks against the vulnerable people in our society happens. I'm so grateful to Patricia Sarles. Again, I'm mentioning her again. Martin and Anne is on the New York City Civics for All list because it helps students hone skills and knowledge to foster democracy now and in the future. So that, again, we can see that, as Dr. King said, injustice to anyone is injustice to everyone. Thank you again, Carolina, for Martin and Anne at the University of Iowa Pentacrest Museums. I am so proud to see that book in your museum. I am so proud to see it in the hands of Ronald Leopold, director of the Anne Frank House, who does so much good in seeing bigotry, discrimination anywhere, knowing that this is what Anne Frank would have wanted. She would have wanted us to attack discrimination wherever we see it. Same for Dr. King. Thank you to Kirsten Comfiel and again, Carolina. This is again from the great Dory Lerner. She has created, and I urge you to go to the National Civil Rights Museum for all the wonderful work she has done. She created a Venn diagram so that kids interactively could see, what do these two great figures have in common? That's in the center of the Venn diagram. How are they different? We are each unique. I'm not trying to say everyone is the same. Our uniqueness is wonderful and brilliant and to be celebrated, but we also, there's a Venn diagram that shows where we are all the same, and we need to support and help each other. Thank you, Dory, for this Venn diagram, you wonderful programs. The wonderful Patricia Sarles invited me to the New York City School Library Conference, where she invited the Anne Frank Center for Mutual Respect to present their wonderful play, Letters from Anne Frank and Anne and Martin, and have an actress and an actor, words from the actual diary, words from the letter from a Birmingham jail. This is the real Dr. King and Anne Frank again. This is a picture from the book, illustrated by the wonderful Yevgenia Neighborg. I urge you to enjoy Yevgenia's brilliant work, because she really creates emotions that children can still process and yet have so much resonance. And we can turn the page again. The next slide, please. This is so important to me, the letter from the Birmingham jail, which is quoted in the play, Letters from Anne and Martin. We should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal. It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. Even so, I am sure that had I lived in Germany at the time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers. At this point, when I share this with kids, I always say, what did Dr. King mean? I thought he was a Baptist minister. Did he have Jewish brothers and sisters? And of course, the kids, being wise, always said, he meant we are all brothers and sisters. We are one human family. If kids take only that away from this book, Martin and Anne, the Kindred Spirits, then I am so proud. Then that is what I want them to, if they take that away, then that is everything to me. And that is what your wonderful museums are teaching. Call to action, and I know we need to go quickly, but again, a call to action. I know this is what you are doing in all these wonderful Pentacrest Museum, National Civil Rights Museum, New York City Library, Civics for All. Here, I created a Kindred Spirits project, and where kids can see that they are kindred, show the ways in which they can link up with kids in other communities. Kids from South Georgia Elementary in Amarillo, Texas, they saw the attacks against immigrants in Amarillo, Texas, so they reached out to share Martin and Anne with them. This made me cry. They Skyped with them. They sent them books. They discussed the book together. Again, to show we are all one human family. And we can keep going. The next slide, please. This meant the world to me. They had, what Martin and Anne were not rich or born to powerful positions. Why do we remember them? Because of their words, because they had a vision of how the world could be, how they used their words to inspire others to do better. And you know what? That's something we all can do. We're not necessarily born to positions of wealth or power, but we all have the power of using our words to do better, to make the world a better place. Again, these are pictures of these children. From the book, no one could kill the way Martin inspired others, just as Anne's words will never die. And it was another example of a school in Dallas, where this school in Dallas, and this was a school for kids with special needs, they gave this school, the Oak Hill Academy, you would think, oh, we're going to help the school with special needs. No, everyone can help. And they decided to help kids in the Vogel alcove, homeless kids whose parents dropped them off during the day because they have no home to go to while the parents at work. They dropped off treats. They dropped off inspirational words. And now we can go to the last page. I'm so proud of those kids. This is the last page of the book. And this is something I truly believe. This is why I wrote it. Love is stronger than hate. Kindness can heal the world. We lost these two visionaries too soon, but they live on in our hearts. These words live on. The fact that you're doing this program shows the power of words to inspire, give us courage and hope, and to help others, a call to action. Thank you so much for welcoming me and for allowing me to contribute to this fabulous program. Thank you.
And thank you, Nancy. Thank you, everyone. What we're going to allow an extra 5 minutes for questions, because I want to make sure people have that opportunity. So if what we're gonna do is I've got the director of the Pentacrest Museums with us, who's been monitoring questions and also providing links. So we're gonna just provide you links of everything that's coming up so that you can continue to participate. And as Nancy said, have conversations, buy the book. The book is available at Prairie Lights here in Iowa City, and also of course online and at the library for those that need access. All the libraries supply both of these books. So we're so grateful, amongst other books that both Nancy and David have produced. And I will put together this resource to all the registrants so that you have it. So without further ado, I want to allow questions. So let's get to our Q&A, and I'm going to actually stop sharing for the moment and put us in a view that everybody can see everybody. We did have a question for David Polonsky. What do you say to young aspiring student artists present today for the University of Iowa who have talent and passion with illustration, but find themselves early in life still in search of their own perspective or the stories they want to tell? It's inspiring to consider the retelling of age-old stories in new formats, and this work is just as important than the introductions of new stories. Do you agree? And if you need me to, if you need me to put that in the chat, I can. What do you say to young artists?
Just keep going. I think there's a huge. It's a thing of quality of life, doing something that you love. It's very hard to pursue it, but it's well worth it. But if you don't enjoy it, just stop. That's these are my advice. And as for the other part of the question, I'm afraid
the other part of the question is, it's inspiring to consider retelling the age-old stories in new formats. And this work is just as important as the introduction of new stories. Do you agree? Using new formats for stories as you've done.
In many ways, we are always retelling the same stories. In this case, I think it's kind of this, it's a Jewish thing. Very soon, the last Holocaust survivors will be gone. And all we have left are stories. And we need to keep telling and retelling them in each and every way possible. And making new stories about the old stories, looking again at these things, and just to continue a conversation. And I think most important thing about it is not censoring any kind of artistic treatment. And saying this apropos what happened with the mouse, Art Speakers Mouse.
Right. Mouse is a good example. Thank you, David. I will like to add a question for Nancy. In the light, from Laura, in the light of current charged atmosphere around school libraries, I'd be interested in hearing Nancy talk about whether she's ever had pushback from schools, parents, on including any of her books in the curriculum or libraries. Great question, Laura.
That is a great question. If it has happened, I am not aware of it as of now, but I would like to say that I am just so proud of all the librarians who are pushing back against that, and I am part of a lot of children's book writing groups that are standing up for other authors whose books are being banned. You know, there's been some great advice out there. You know, if you see a banned list, that's probably the list you should be reading. And because why would somebody not want you to read something? You know, the first thing that Hitler did was he burned the books. And one of my favorite books of all time, I mean, I have so many favorite books. I mean, I love books, but Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 should be required reading and rereading. It's probably on a banned book list right now, but it's all about, he was so prescient. You know, he talked about a society in which fireman's job was to burn books. Why do you burn books? Because that's how you can control the minds of people. If they're empty of the knowledge of what happened before, it's much easier to control them. And so censorship, we should be very scared of that. We need to push back against that. And again, if something is banned, that's probably all the more reason to try and read it and to promote it and support it. And I know that librarians are trying to do that, and educators, and I absolutely applaud them. I do feel like a lack of knowledge is what creates the petri dish for discrimination, and that's why it's so dangerous.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm going to have time for one more question. This is actually for both of you, for Nancy and David, by Sarah. Nancy and David, you clearly learned a lot about Anne Frank and her family while creating your beautiful books. I'm wondering if you've learned anything about yourself in the process. Great question, Sarah.
If I want me to jump in, I just, for me, I just identified with so much, as a young Jewish girl growing up, and, all these issues that she had were just so, I could identify with her so much, even those issues. I felt so sorry, like in later years, about the mother, because, all those issues she had with her mother, I did. I mean, I think most 15-year-old girls might have problems with their mother that they work past as they get older. Now, she never got a chance to get older. I later heard about how in the concentration camp, her mother, this just broke my heart, because her mother starved to death because she was saving bread for Anne and her sister, hoping that, that they had moved to another camp, and she couldn't even give it to them, but she would rather her daughters have that. This was the kind of mother they had. But when you're 15, you don't know that. And when I was 15, I can assure you, I had my issues with my mother, whom I absolutely adore and I am so grateful for. But I just think that, I think I learned perspective, and I learned how you can have the bigger view, and I learned the power of words from her. And it's probably one of the reasons I became a writer. Because I learned the power of words. Anne's words will live forever. And I wish we would have had her longer and had more words from her. But she certainly inspired me with the power of words, and how words can make a difference and make the world better. And I will always try to do that with the words that I have had the privilege of getting to write and share.
Thank you, Nancy. David, how about you?
Well, I must admit that the first time I tried to read Anne's diary, I was about 16, and I didn't get it. It was girly, and it took for me 40 years to achieve, as a man, to achieve the emotional intelligence of a 12-year-old girl. So I'm happy to have been able to catch up a little bit, and for me, it was a way of bonding, another way of bonding with my daughter. She's 9 now, and she reread the book a number of times, and it was at first I was very reluctant to be representing, being this, what I am, representing a 13-year-old girl, but you can find a 13-year-old girl inside you if you keep your senses keen, and it's very enriching.
Wow, thank you both. It's very moving to hear that, and get sort of personal insight to the experience, not just developing these books, but what's come after that, and the response that's come after it as well, from Hamilton cast reading to the graphic novel genre that's been skyrocketing in society, and even despite these sort of things where some schools might limit, for example, banning the Book of Mouse in one county. That's not stopping it. I think there are more people, and I think, to Anne and both Martin Luther King's hope, there's more good than there is bad out there. love trumps hate in that regards. So I just want to say thank you so much to all of our panelists. It's been a pleasure. It's been an honor. We will share all the resources that both of you have provided, as well as Waltraud's book, incredible book list of diaries. We even had somebody comment that they did a grief diary after somebody they loved died. So something to take for many different reasons. So thank you so much. And we will have this session recorded and shared out with the public. And we will also choose 2 people from our participants today to receive signed copies of both David's book and Nancy's book. Thank you, David and Nancy, for volunteering to give that to us. We're so glad. All right, in that case, I am going to stop the recording and say thank you again for coming.